Well, now it's time to talk about the teen idols, or I think, as I say in my textbook, teen idols for idle teens. Teen idols were a rather cynical move on the part of the music business to take all the attraction of somebody like Elvis Presley, but take anything that was threatening about it away, so that young girls, preteens, very young teenagers could have a kind of ideal boyfriend who was absolutely non-threatening, with no danger of any kind of sexual advance or anything like that. This is the kind of guy that young girls could sit and listen to sing a song as if he was singing it only to them, but maybe he would hold their hand or kiss them on the cheek, but what he really wanted to know was to get to know their person. What he really wanted to do was get to know their personality, and that's about it. So these ideal boyfriends were marketed at teenage girls. And so one of the most important things about these teen idols is that they be really, really handsome. That they could sing, well, that would be okay, but if they can't sing, we'll fix that in the studio. But they ought to look great. So rather than being musicians who sort of rose to the top because they had the ability and all that, they're really, sort of chosen almost as kind of fashion models first, and we'll worry about the voice and the music second. But that's essentially what they were doing. These teen idols were probably more modeled on somebody like Pat Boone in the kind of very sort of clean image than they were on Elvis Presley. Although, if you look at Elvis's career as he gets out of the Army, remember last week we talked about how he went into the Army in 1958. Well, he was out by 1960, and there was a real attempt to mainstream Elvis. We'll talk a little bit later about Elvis in the movies and the various kinds of films that he did in Hollywood during this period of the early 60s up through the mid-60s. But Elvis even took a turn in the direction of teen idol. There are a couple of tunes of his, especially Are You Lonely Tonight?, which was a #1 hit for him in 1960. It's a song that goes back to the 1920s. The first group to have a hit with it was a group called Blue Darin in 1950. I don't know whether that was a group or an artist. I don't know that version. But what I know about that version is that's the first version where there's a kind of talking over the music, which Elvis does. And if you find that music somewhere, that track somewhere, the Elvis track, and listen to it, you'll see that not only is it a kind of a slow song, but in the center of it, he actually speaks some lines, sort of vaguely Shakespearean kinds of lines. But anyway, they're lines, it's almost like he's sort of speaking them into the ear of the young girl who's sort of listening to Elvis Presley. It is absolutely a kind of a teen idol record from Elvis, and it's just about the right time for that to be happening, 1960, as he's sort of leaving rock and roll behind and moving more in a direction of a kind of a mainstream audience. But here are some of the other big teen idols, and some of these guys actually did have talent. I mean, when I say they didn't have to have talent to do the gig, I mean it was more about the looks, but some of them actually were pretty talented guys and went on to do some interesting things and had plenty of talent. A guy like Frankie Avalon, for example. He, and I'll talk in a minute about Fabian, both of these guys came out of Philadelphia and were managed by Bob Marcucci, were on Chancellor Records. Bob Marcucci would a lot of times write the songs, he would produce the record, and he owned the label. He was sort of like awful lot like Phil Spector, we'll talk about in a minute, except that he was sort of grooming these teen idols, and he had a stable of teen idols, not unlike Larry Parnes, who we'll talk about next week when we talk about the Beatles in the UK, who was doing a similar thing with teen idols. But Frankie Avalon, one of his couple of big #1 hits for him in 1959, Venus is one of them. Another one's called Why. But then as the 60s unfold, Frankie Avalon not only has hits on the charts as a teen idol, but he also starts acting in movies with Annette Funicello, who before the movies, her career in movies, had been one of the Mouseketeers from the Mickey Mouse Club, which was a popular show on television. So the Frankie and Annette beach party movies like Beach Blanket Bingo and some of these others became a very, very popular form of youth entertainment. If young people wanted to go to a movie and see a movie that was really directed at them, these Frankie and Annette movies would be part of that. I mentioned before Fabian, another Philadelphia guy under Bob Marcucci. A couple of songs from 1959, Turn Me Loose and Tiger. Again, the kind of guy who looks great. Maybe Fabian had less vocal technique or ability or natural aptitude than some of the others, but he looked great. Bobby V is another one coming out of North Dakota, but here recording with Liberty Records out of Los Angeles, had a big #1 hit in 1961 with Take Good Care of My Baby, written by Jerry Goffin and Carole King, who we talked about just in the last lecture with regard to the Brill Building approach. Bobby Vinton on Epic out of New York City. Epic was a subsidiary of Columbia. He had a great big hit, #1, 1962 with Roses Are Red, My Love, a whole series of hits, in fact. And then Bobby Darin. Interesting story about Bobby Darin. Not only did he have a hit in 58 with Splish Splash and 59 with Dream Lover, but he had a hit with a song called Mac the Knife, which actually comes from a Kurt Weill opera called The Threepenny Opera. So it was a kind of a crossover from a piece from classical music, or at least or music theater, into rock and roll. And so that gives you some idea of what was going on with the teen idols. The ideal boyfriend, the maybe a little bit too cynically constructed product, right? But one can laugh at it all they want, but these guys sold lots and lots of records. And from a music business point of view, this was an extremely successful strategy for these years. So let's turn from the teen idols now to talk about this rising role of record producers and the girl groups.